welcome back. Today we're going to take the next step on our Torqstorm Supercharger install on this Ford 460. So for those of you who've seen the earlier video, we went ahead and looked at putting on the different brackets. We put on the accessory drive, put on the head unit, and basically all the hard parts required to go ahead and make this installation. So we'll go ahead and pick up from where we did that last time, and we'll show you the different parts that make up what I'm going to call the cold side of the supercharger installation.
So just a quick reminder of where we were the last time. Once again, there's accessory drive, and there is our different brackets for our head unit, our crank pulley, water pump pulley, all that good fun stuff. The eagle eye among you may notice that at this point we go ahead and we have the throttle body set up there. Right now I'm just setting it in there for mock-up type purposes. I think in the earlier video I'd mentioned I was going to do the initial break-in, with the carburetor, and that still is the case. But at this point I want to go ahead and get this cold side mocked up with that Phytech unit, so that'll be easier for that final install here in the future. So stay with me and we'll go through the different steps. When you order a Torqstorm kit, what are all these other things then that come with the kit? Well, this is kind of what it looks like right here. Got them laid out here on the floor, and I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit on some of these. We'll go ahead and start with the carb hat. It's kind of a low profile carb hat there, and it has a nut that has an O-ring on it to help seal any boost leaks from the top. One of the things I will mention is that nut is set up for a 5/16 bolt. As it ends up, I'm using a Phytech throttle body, and they come standard with a 5/16, so it's not going to be a problem for me. However, if you're using a carb, a lot of carburetors use a 1/4 inch stud there, so you may have to figure out something a little bit different. We can go ahead and we can see the blow-off valve that we have here, and then we have some of the different piping for the intake. There's a 3.5 inch K&N filter. We got some silicone couplers. This bracket here right now, that's the one that the blow-off valve mounts to, and you can also see that there's a bung there that you can mount if you're going to use any water methanol injection or anything like that. As it happens, I actually bought a Snow Performance water methanol injection for something else, and I don't think I'm going to use it for that project, so who knows, I may end up using it here. Don't know if I'll need it. It's going to be blow through this throttle body, so it has a cooling effect like a carburetor does. And also I'm going to be pretty low boost, probably 6 to 8 pounds of boost is my target. And probably won't need it, but I do already have it, so maybe I will use it. Once again, here's another coupler. We have all the necessary clamps. You can also see that there's some vacuum hose there for that blow-off valve, and there's also like a fuel pump block-off plate. So let's go ahead and let's start put some of these parts and pieces up there and see how it's going to work. I promise you that I'll look at the instructions here at some point, but first step I took is I went ahead and got the carb hat put on there. And so I wanted to make sure my stud is about the right length. I happen to have some 5/16 all thread laying around. So I went ahead and I threaded it in there into the throttle body, and then, didn't want to stick out too far from the nut, but I think that looks like it should work, pretty well. Let's get a side view here of the throttle body. So it doesn't stick up too high. Like I said, it's kind of a low profile type thing. I think it's going to work, fairly well. One thing that'll be interesting is what the final orientation is going to look like. I remember watching Engine Masters one time where it said, and this was through carburetor, but it said the best fuel distribution was when the outlet, or I should say the inlet, I guess, into the carb hat actually faces straight forward. So as we start mocking up all this other stuff, I guess we'll see where the orientation comes out at, and we'll go from there. The kit supplies an O-ring that needs to be put on the top of the throttle body there, and then that seals up against the carb hat. So when I had first put it up there, I was just using the regular carb gasket, so I had to take that off real quick and put that O-ring on. Another thing I want to mention that we had mentioned briefly in the other video was concerns about the water neck direction. So if we kind of start going over to see where it's pointed, you can see that right now it's kind of pointed right toward the outlet there of that supercharger. So that's one of the things we're going to pay close attention to for this mock-up is, are we going to be able to clock this supercharger, meaning can we bring this, one direction or the other to help it clear better, or at a certain point am I going to have to buy a swivel water neck here to make it work? So as I get parts and pieces up here, what I'm planning on doing, with the front clip off, not necessarily be able to put a radiator in all that easily, but I'm gonna go ahead and get that top radiator hose, and we'll go ahead and put that on there, and we'll see if there's a way we can snake it and make it work. You know, maybe it'll just kind of have a slight bend in it and come in here. That's something we got to look at as we get into this. One of the main reasons I make these videos is some of the stuff that I'm working on that I haven't really seen detailed out all that much. I mean, you can find videos for Torqstorm installations on different engine families, but I'd never seen one here in a 460. So I'm going to show you it all, warts and all, of how this works. So I guess the first part of this I'll go ahead and show is that I installed this coupler here to the carb hat, and that thing is kind of a bear. You know, there's a 3-inch on one end, it's 3.5 inch on the other, and of course you got to make it fit that oval of the carb hat. So there was a little bit of cussing, there was a little bit of stretching, a few tools. You got to be careful. You don't want to, of course, rip a coupler or anything like that. In fact, I almost thought I was gonna have to get my my wife to help me, and we all know that you probably don't want to do that too much. You know, if you're one of those freaks that has 3 arms and 3 hands, this will be a task that's well suited to you. But it was a little bit of a bear. So I had started mocking some stuff up here, and there's supposed to be a coupler and blow-off valve that comes on the outlet of the compressor. And as you can see, you know, we're running into some space problems. In the instructions, it does say that you may have to trim some of the couplers for best fit, but let me grab this coupler real quick. All right, so when I said coupler, I actually meant this blow-off valve adapter. So as you can see, it's supposed to sit, you know, in here, and it butts up against the outlet here, and then you can see it goes almost all the way up. It's a little bit long right now. I'm trying to see if I can make that work. Definitely needs some trimming, but if you see where I'm at right now, I'd be trimming almost all the way up into the bend, which isn't going to work. And so, like I said, I'm set up right against this outlet, so the height is wrong. You know, I suppose if you had a situation where your carb or throttle body sat a lot higher, maybe this would work, you know, as is. But I'm gonna have to do some trimming, maybe even over this blow-off valve adapter. If I end up doing that, it's gonna be a little difficult because, of course, it's got, you know, this bead rolled into it to keep a hose from falling off. It's made out of aluminum. I do actually have the capability of weld aluminum, but not all that well. So I'm gonna have to look at some couple different options here, because I either trim this thing down and put a new bead into it. I've seen some ways you can kind of do it yourself. You can create a pair of pliers to make a bead. So that may be an option, or maybe I do try to cut a section out and try to re-weld it. I don't know. Could get interesting here. So I'm going to take a look at some different things. Something else I'll throw out here is we keep mentioning the whole water neck scenario. If I take this water neck and I try to put it there the way it should line up, it should kind of be about like that, and as you can see, it comes right into where this is at. So that's not gonna work super well either. So I got some things here to look at, of course. I might try clocking this more so counterclockwise. That would give me a little more height, you know, so I could rotate the carb pad around, rotate the hose down. Maybe I can find a spot that works. I've rotated about as far as I can go because it starts hitting the compressor housing there against that standoff washer. So yeah, interesting. We have our heater hose attachments right here, and they're kind of there, but I think that 5/8 rubber heater hose, this one I think for sure will work, because I can even get my finger around here almost in a straight line. That should work. This one here is gonna have to come off and kind of bend around a little bit. So I wish it was a little bit different than what we're finding, but once again, warts and all, this is what we got. So play around some different configurations before I make my final decision here. One other thing I guess I'll show you what I'm looking at is that You know, it would be easier probably if I could just raise that throttle body, but you can kind of see that cowl lip on the left there. And so when I look at the height, I may be into a situation where I think I cleared the carb hat, but the way that the engine is angled and things, I don't know if I'm going to have a lot of extra hood clearance either. So stay tuned. The saga continues of trying to figure out how to fit this thing in here. This is what I'm looking at right now. So I basically took that compressor housing and I looked to see what it would look like if it was pointed basically, you know, straight up. And so when I do that, of course, we take a look at here. That's my coupler off the carb hat, and it would come out basically at 90 degrees, and you can see it in line. It would probably be tilted up, you know, a little bit higher. Here's some of the things I like about this potentially. I could get a 90-degree 3-inch coupler to come off of the compressor there. And then I think what that would allow me to do is I'd still need some trimming, but I think I could put this blow-off valve adapter, you know, close, kind of hard to see it, close to my bend over here. And I think that would fit between the 90. And so that would fit the blow-off valve, you know, pointing backward. And I think that would work okay. And of course, the blow-off valve, does it point down? Does it point, you know, forward? It doesn't really matter at this point. So I think that would work okay if I go ahead and use that 90 there. Is the 90 a best scenario? Well, it's not. You know, we would come 90 then out of the compressor, and then of course you have another 90 in your carb hat. At the end of the day though, once again, this isn't super max performance. If it means that I have a little more restriction, I don't know that it's a huge deal. One of the things that I put in here too, just for kind of taking a look, I went to see could my radiator hose fit. So there is the radiator hose, and it probably come a little bit more this direction, my guess, to plug in there. As you can see, it does touch against that compressor housing. And of course, if we had a coupler there, it would make it stick a little bit further out, but it's not going to kink this hose anywhere. And it looks like it would allow that to work. That's not my only reason for going that 90, by the way, but it is a plus that I do get out of that situation of using a 90 in this case. So of course I don't have a 90 here, so I'm going to do a little bit of looking and see if I can find a 90 in short order and kind of see what that would cost. And I really do think that would work. Like I said, the only thing that I'm looking at now is my height going to be okay? Is that going to interfere with my hood? I think we're still fine with it like that, but time will tell. So I'm going to go ahead and probably look for that 90, and we'll see if that'll work. Through the magic of video, I now have a 90-degree coupler in a matter of seconds after we last let off. In reality, we're about a week or so later. So here's that 90-degree coupler that I was talking about that, you know, in some ways I think it fixes some problems. You can see that we have that outlet of the supercharger straight up. It's going to make a nice bend. Of course, we got to get that blow-off valve fitting there in between the two couplers, but look like we can make this work. I also have the radiator hose in there, and as you can see, there's a little bit of a indentation right here, you know, where the radiator hose is going against the compressor, but it's really not denting in the hose all that much, so I don't think it's really going to have any sort of restriction on flow or anything like that. So in a lot of ways, it looks like this might work. And so of course we'll have to, you know, go ahead and trim this hose back so we can fit in that blow-off valve fitting. There is one big thing though that I continue to look at, and it's going to be really hard for me to tell what's going to happen until I get that front clip back on. So if I get back here at an angle, because of the angle that engine sits, kind of imagine where the hood's going to be. It's going to be dang close. I hope it's going to work. there's only one way to find out. One of the things I also looked at is that I do have my hood over here against my fridge. Not a super great spot for a hood, but there is this internal bracing that you see on the hood, and so may be able to trim some of it out in the right places if there is a problem there. So that's just something that we're gonna have to, I guess, kind of deal with when we get to it. So what are we gonna do next? Well, we're gonna grab this blow-off valve and we're gonna kind of set up here and try to figure out where we need to make the cut on this hose. So we're gonna be able to butt the hose up, you know, against where the blow-off valve goes. And then we'll take a look at it from this other angle, and that's about where my thumb is, that line, that's about where we'll make the cut on that coupler there. And so it'll go ahead and just fit, you know, nice and tight in there on both sides, and we should have something that works. As you take a look, my carb hat isn't 90 degrees out of the from the throttle body out here, so I'll probably have to trim just a little bit extra because it would be nice to have that carb hat 90 degrees to the world here. Another reason why it makes sense to have it 90 degrees to the world is that it'll just line up better. As we can see, it doesn't quite line up, and so if we were to rotate it a little bit more, you know, it will without putting a kink, you know, in the coupler. So I'll go ahead and get this marked to make my cut, and then I'll walk people through, you know, what's going to take place here. You can see that I made my mark there. I think I have it in a spot where that blow-off valve fitting will go easily between there. And then, you know, you don't have to be exact, you know, I suppose, making that line where you're going to cut it. I sometimes struggle with getting a nice cut line on a round object like that. So, you know, if you're careful, you can probably use some painter's tape and go around there and try to make sure you're as square as possible. One of the things that I like to do, I like to use a hose clamp if you have one that's in the right size. And so you can put it on there, you know, and make sure that it's fairly square to the world. And then, you know, you could probably use it either as a guide to make your cut with a utility knife, or, you know, scribe a line around it, take the clamp off, then make your cut. I guess whatever you're most comfortable with. But just to reiterate, I do like using a hose clamp just to make sure that I can make a nice line that's square to the world, and it'll look a lot better, you know, once that cut's made, if it's nice and clean too. Here it is after I made my cut. So while the hose clamp makes me make a nice straight square line, you still have to cut it out, and evidently I can't cut as square as I can mark, but I think it's gonna go ahead and look okay. So we have our gap there. Looks like it's gonna be the right amount of gap for us to work, so we're gonna go ahead and see if we can get that blow-off valve fitting in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a little bit of WD-40 and spray it there on the inside of those couplers just so everything slides nice and easy, and let's go ahead and get that in there. Here's what things look like when I have that blow-off valve coupler in there. I think things turned out pretty good. I think we're pretty square to the world, actually. We have it sitting in there. I guess take a look at what you think is going to work best for your application as far as where you want the blow-off valve, because depending on how you put it in there, there's different ways you could have it sitting. We're already worried about hood clearance, so we can't have it sitting, you know, straight up. That little port right there on there is for, you know, water methanol injection if you decide to use that. And so, you know, I could have had this probably sit straight forward, but that would have made that port sit straight up. I actually might use water methanol on this. So for that reason, right now, we'll see if it's the final decision or not. I went ahead and have it sitting so the blow-off valve is kind of sitting down there at an angle, and then where the water methanol is also sits kind of at an angle. Hopefully it doesn't create any sort of clearance. So we'll have to play with that a little bit as well. That's probably about where everything is gonna sit. We still have our radiator hose in there. You know, it doesn't obstruct the blow-off valve there. We have our heater hose fittings down in there, but we should be able to weave them in and out and make that make sense and make it all connect up right. So I'm not too worried about that at this point. The major thing I'm worried about, of course, as I keep mentioning, is hood clearance. And especially if you're going to use this in one of those applications where you maybe have a little less hood clearance to begin with, it may be a problem. You might have to do something different. I will be the first to admit that this is all a little bit fugly as far as how I have it arranged right now. You know, a better solution perhaps would be to go ahead on that blow-off valve coupler and shorten that whole thing up. And I think that would give you some better options to have it, you know, kind of at that 45-degree angle, you know, the outlet of the compressor, you know, like we started off earlier in the video. The main problem though I had with that was just, it was not going to work for me as far as, you know, that radiator outlet there on the intake manifold. I think if you did go that 45-degree route, you probably need to get a swivel fitting there on your water neck, and then you'd probably have to make up something special on your radiator hose, you know, to make it all work. So for the constraints that I was dealing with, not wanting to buy a bunch of extra parts, this is a solution that I'm coming up with right now. And I guess we'll see once we get the front clip on and once we get the hood on, see if I have any major clearance issues. I may have to reconsider this a little bit, but I'm guessing the final solution is going to look a lot like this. I'm not putting any clamps or anything on this for right now. I think I'd mentioned that I was planning on doing the initial braking on this engine, probably with a carburetor, which some of you are probably going to snicker at. Although I'm half tempted to use this Phytech, it did come off a running engine off a 428, so everything would be probably close enough to work pretty well. But I might just go to the carburetor just because I know I can make that work for startup. So once again, this is probably a little bit fugly. However, when we kind of take a look at the rest of the pickup, I don't know that fugly is going to be a big deal. So this looks like it's going to work. I'm getting excited though. You know, it's one thing to have the head unit and everything on there, that gets excited, but now this is kind of what the entire system is going to look like. So, you know, I'm ready to make this thing make some noise. I'll go ahead and we'll do the last step here. And so that last step is to go ahead and put the filter and things on the compressor. And then we'll be done with our mock-up, and I guess at that point we'll go ahead and take it all off again, except for the hard parts. We'll leave them all on there, but we'll take all the cold side off it so I can go ahead and break this engine in, naturally aspirated with the carburetor, the points distributor, and then after we get a good break in, then I can put it on, you know, for the final time. This air intake stuff is easy. Look at that, final installation. Just take the parts and pieces and flop it in there. Just kidding. That's not what it's going to actually look like. What they do is they supply you with this 45-degree silicone coupler, and then the intake tube is also a 45-degree fitting. So there's going to need to be some trimming here on both of those parts and pieces. But it kind of looked funny to me just to slap it together like that, and I wanted to see what it looked like. So there's part of me that says if it wasn't going to have a hood, it would be kind of a little bit of a wow factor. It does actually kind of look cool looking, but yeah, that's not what it's going to be. When I take a look at this, we've got a couple things going on here. It does kind of sit everything in line, you know, right over the top, kind of the valve cover area, kind of in line where I'm looking at here. And so it would sit, you know, kind of close back to the firewall. Looks like the filter would kind of be, you know, in this area here. What I'm going to do at this point is I don't think I'm going to make any cuts to try to make this thing work. And here's the reason I say that. I don't know exactly where the front clip sits as far as the inner fenders, where they go. I don't have my PCV fitting, you know, in there right yet. So I think I'll wait to get the front clip on before I actually make my final cuts on these pieces to determine where that filter sits. I know that's been a little bit of a complaint looking at the Torqstorm system, is where it puts that filter at, because it does kind of put it right above the valve cover. So if you're on headers, you know, like I am, you do have some hot air there. There might be some way to plumb some cooler air, maybe, through the hood or put a vent there or something. One of the things that I'm planning on doing is these pickups here, they had like a rubber piece that's supposed to seal, to the hood. I'm not going to put that piece back in there. So it's going to leave a little bit of a gap to let a little more under hood heat get out, which should help. But I guess we'll see. Another thing that I have in mind is, like I said, the way that this tube is set up and where I've seen it in pictures, sets a filter about here. But one of the things I took a look at with these 45-degree bends here is that there's probably a way, if I wanted to, I could curl and put the filter, toward the back of the throttle body. And maybe there's some reasons why that makes sense too, as long as it doesn't interfere with, any sort of throttle linkage or anything else. So I'm going to toy with that one and scratch my old thinker a little bit before I, carve something up and do something I regret. So for right now, I think I'm going to leave it like this. Just because it is kind of funny and kind of like the look of it.
So that's the end of this video. Hopefully this is going to help some people out there. The first part, like we had mentioned earlier, we covered the hard parts and getting the supercharger and the bracketry on there. And then the second part of the equation was, of course, getting the cold side done. One of the things that was a little bit of a surprise to me is that the first part of this, putting on the brackets, the supercharger, all that was actually the easy part of this entire install. So when we got to the cold side, when you have to start looking at things as far as how do you want it routed, what's your hood clearance going to be like, do you have the right couplers, all those sort of things. As we mentioned earlier in the video, it's made for that compressor outlet to be more at a 45-degree angle, but in my case, the blow-off valve adapter, was way too long. I would hope the Torqstorm could actually maybe shorten that adapter up some. Maybe that's the way I should have went, as we talked about, but I didn't really have a great way. I could cut it easy enough, but as far as rolling a bead, I wasn't sure how good I was going to be able to do that, or make a slice cut and weld it back together with my limited aluminum welding capabilities. At the end of the day, I think I have something that's going to work for me. I think it's going to work okay in this pickup. It's a little bit fugly, but at the end of the day, it's not terrible either. The air intake, we're going to work on a little bit more once we get the front clip on, and it's looking like it's all coming together. So I really hope that this has helped some people out. It's been fun making these videos. And don't think that this is the end of it. More to come. It's going to be a little bit of a gap before we have any follow-up videos. But like I've mentioned, the next step is to go ahead and get this engine broken in, naturally aspirated. Once we can get it broken and naturally aspirated, I'll go ahead and get that Vitec, wired in for this pickup. And then at that point, we'll start being able to play with boost a little bit. At some point, I wouldn't mind also getting this thing on a dyno. The thing that would be kind of neat about this supercharger is that I could go ahead and I could go to a chassis dyno, and it wouldn't take much. I could go ahead and take a blower belt off, and take the half assembly off, and I could do a run naturally aspirated, and then put the blower belt back on, put that hat and everything back on, and could get a back-to-back run, which I think could be interesting for people as well. So got some future plans on what I want to do here. Be patient with me, because this isn't my full-time gig. This is when I have time to do so. Of course, the weather's getting nice as well, and so that's going to make it more attractive, maybe do some other stuff than being here in the shop. But I have some big motivations. I want to get this pickup project, going this spring. So once again, hope I helped. If you have any questions and anything I can help any of you out with, go ahead and put your questions down there in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you just as soon as possible. And I appreciate you viewing. Thank you.